Rio wakes up surrounded by clouds, standing before an angel. The angel begins by telling him that he has recently died, yet he won't be heading to the afterlife just yet. In short, Rio has become the latest victim of the infamous truck con. Now, it's up to Michael to send him off to a new world to begin a fresh life. According to Michael, Rio won't be given any special mission or grand objective in this new world. He's free to live as he pleases. When Rio expresses his desire for a peaceful and laid-back life, Michael has no objections. But before sending him off, Michael needs to give Rio a quick overview of the world he'll be reincarnated into. The world is called Phi, a magical land where about 20% of the population can use spells tied to their natural elemental affinity. In Rio's case, his strongest affinity is with a water element. Since Rio asked for a peaceful and laid-back life, Michael went ahead and prepared a cozy little house for him. As a starter kit, he included 2 tutorial books, a knife, and even placed a protective barrier around the house to keep monsters at bay. As part of his beginner's kit, Michael has provided Rio with an ice house stocked with enough food to last 2 months, ensuring he won't face hunger anytime soon. Additionally, Michael included a guidebook containing detailed information on every monster Rio might come across in the region. While this will be useful for dealing with the forest's creatures later, Rio's current focus is on testing out his newfound magical abilities. He steps outside and shouts the spell, "Water come forth," which instantly forms a sphere of water in his hand. Magic turns out to be much simpler than he imagined. Even more surprising, he can cast the same spell just by visualizing the water ball, so saying the incantation isn't actually required. Now that he's confirmed he can use magic, he heads straight to the bathhouse and begins filling the tub with water. However, he quickly notices a problem. He only knows how to produce water, and there's no way he's going to enjoy a bath that isn't hot. So, he goes outside and tries to build a fire to heat the water manually. The only issue is, he has no clue how to start a fire this way. After a while, he gives up and lies on his back in defeat. But as he stares up at the sun, an idea hits him. Rio grabs a basin, fills it with water, and begins focusing on it, trying to compress it while drawing out the heat. Slowly, ice starts to form. With a bit more effort and practice, he manages to shape the ice into a makeshift magnifying glass. Using it, he harnesses the sunlight to start a fire. With the fire finally going, he heats up his bath, which was filled with ice water. By the end of his first day, he's finally able to unwind and enjoy a proper soak. Now that he's mastered making ice, Rio realizes the opposite should also be possible. If he can remove heat to freeze water, he should be able to add heat to create warm water. This becomes his next goal, something he'll need to practice in the coming days. You ever wish your favorite anime character could text you back? Well, now they can. This cool app called Polybuzz that lets you create your own unique characters and text them as much as you want. Polybuzz lets you also create your own characters from scratch, so your only limit is your imagination. Just don't get too freaky now. You want to text anime legends like Goku, Vegeta, Gojo, Itadori, and loads more. You want to text a guy like Light Yagami, who keeps asking for your full name and birthday for totally normal reasons. How about Sakura, sending you unsettling emojis you definitely don't want to open in public. You can also explore tons of other cool characters that have already been made by other users. There's really a lot of crazy stuff on here. You guys need to check it out. With over 40 million downloads and 20 million unique characters already created, Polybuzz is basically a whole anime multiverse living inside your phone. Download Polybuzz now using the link in the description and use promo code QUICK55 to unlock exclusive perks and grab a sick 3-day free trial. Who needs plot twists anyway, when you can just write your own? The following morning, as Rio eats breakfast, he starts to think. With only 2 months' supply of food from Michael, he knows he'll need to hunt soon to restock. But he doubts a mere knife will be enough to fend off the forest monsters, so he resolves to begin practicing his attack magic. His first attempt is launching a water ball at a tree, and it works exactly as he imagined. But a small splash of water won't do much in a real fight. He remembers a way to increase the water's force, so he gathers another ball, this time compressing the water into a focused point for more pressure. The idea is sound, but his control isn't strong enough yet. His water jet barely has more power than a toy water gun. Rio recalls something Michael mentioned before his reincarnation. Magic relies heavily on imagination. The clearer the image in his mind, the better the result, and he just needs to keep refining it through practice. After several days of non-stop training, Rio's water jets are starting to take shape and look decent. However, they're still far from powerful enough to take down a monster. Rio has also figured out how to produce hot water, allowing him to enjoy warm baths whenever he likes. However, he's still working on fine-tuning the temperature, as his control isn't quite perfect yet. The next morning, he decides to practice his ice magic once more. This time, he attempts to conjure ice directly from the air, though it's difficult and takes nearly 3 minutes to form. He finally succeeds in creating ice out of nothing. However, unlike water, he struggles to launch it with the same ease. Combat training hasn't been going too well so far. None of the spells Ryo has come up with have had much impact. Still, he spends the next few hours pushing himself, practicing non-stop until he finally collapses from mana depletion. Figuring he's reached his limit for the day, he calls it quits. But the very next morning, as soon as his mana is fully restored, he jumps right back into training. This routine becomes Ryo's daily life over the next few weeks. Thanks to all his hard work, he can now create ice instantly, making it a reliable offensive spell. With his new set of attack magic finally ready and his food supply starting to run out, Ryo ventures into the forest for the first time to begin hunting. He quickly notices a set of animal tracks and decides to follow them, which leads him to a nearby river. While exploring the area, he comes across some quartz by the riverside, something he can use to start fires by striking it against the edge of his sword. He also takes the opportunity to collect some detox herbs, just in case he needs them later. But suddenly, a deep growl rumbles from behind him. When he turns around, he finds himself face to face with a lesser boar, and he freezes in place. The boar charges at Ryo, but this is his first life or death battle, so he panics. At the last possible second, he snaps to his senses and leaps sideways, barely dodging the beast's rush. However, the boar isn't finished its turns, ready to attack again. Luckily, Ryo's mind clears just in time. As the boar charges toward him, he swiftly creates an icy path beneath its hooves, causing it to slip. Without wasting a moment, he summons several sharp ice spikes directly in the boar's path, stabbing it and killing it instantly. After butchering the boar, Ryo pulls out the monster guidebook to learn more about it. According to the book, the lesser boar is actually the weakest monster found in that forest. The guide itself is clearly intended for beginners, so most of the listed creatures are fairly simple. However, toward the end of the book, Ryo notices 2 additional pages that stand out. They look like they might contain something important. One of the pages describes dragons immensely powerful creatures capable of wiping out entire cities by themselves. The guide strongly advises fleeing immediately if he ever comes across one, as fighting it would be hopeless. That said, outrunning a dragon isn't likely either, so running into one is game over. Another page mentions mysterious beings called Akuma, apparently a type of fallen angel. However, the book offers very little information about them. The book's only advice is simple: if you ever encounter one, you're as good as dead. The following day, Ryo heads out to hunt again. But while his guard is down, a giant assassin hawk swoops down from above and launches a surprise attack. The creature uses wind magic to slice through its prey with razor-sharp slashes. Ryo has no choice but to run, quickly summoning ice shields to block the incoming blades of wind. He knows hawks are extremely dangerous opponents and would rather avoid a fight, but escaping isn't an option. That means his only choice now is to stand his ground and fight back. He lifts his hand and launches a stream of water jets, but the hawk skillfully evades the attack and dives at him, using wind magic to strike. Ryo, however, reacts just in time, forming an ice shield that cuts the hawk across the eye and sends it crashing into the ground. Moments later, the hawk regains consciousness. Though it has permanently lost one eye, it takes to the skies to retreat, but before disappearing, it locks eyes with Ryo one last time, etching his face into memory, because now it's personal. Ryo lets out a sigh of relief, grateful to have made it out alive. Still, this is far from the peaceful life he had imagined for himself. During the chase with the hawk, he ran so deep into the forest that he ended up completely lost, wandering until well into the night. As he searches for a way back home, he unexpectedly stumbles upon a glowing lake. Right in the middle of it stands a Dullahan, and from the looks of it, the creature has already noticed him. Over time, Ryo hones his skills through relentless training, mastering the art of hunting and preserving food with little difficulty. His water magic has grown significantly more powerful. He can now conjure razor-sharp ice sheets and slam them down in an instant. Even his water jets have reached new heights, slicing effortlessly through solid stone. At this point, his combat prowess has become formidable. However, ice magic isn't the only thing Ryo has been practicing. Ever since his encounter with the Dullahan, he's ventured into the forest each night to battle it. Strangely, the monster guidebook never mentioned Dullahans. Either they aren't classified as monsters, or they're too advanced for a beginner's manual. Rio. Regardless, Rio remains determined to face it. He rushes in with his ice staff and starts swinging, treating the encounter more like a training session than a real battle after all. The Dullahan completely outmatches him in both power and technique. Rio does his best to defend himself, summoning ice shields to block the incoming blows, but despite his efforts, he's quickly overwhelmed and brought down within seconds. Though the Dullahan has never spoken a single word to him, Rio can't shake the feeling that it's taken on the role of a mentor, trying to mold him into something stronger. Suddenly, the Dullahan lifts its sword and channels water magic to lengthen the blade. Rio is taken aback to discover that it can use water magic too. After showing him how the technique works, the Dullahan hands the sword over to Rio and calmly steps out onto the lake. One day, while Rio is out hunting, he is ambushed by the same assassin hawk from their previous encounter. He doesn't remember it being black before. It must have evolved, pushing itself to grow stronger just for this moment of vengeance. The hawk swoops down at Rio, unleashing a barrage of wind slashes. In response, Rio quickly conjures 5 layers of ice walls for protection. But now that the hawk has evolved, its wind attacks are far more powerful, strong enough to shatter all of Rio's defenses in an instant. And now a wave of anxiety begins to creep over him. Rio sprints across the field, throwing up ice walls to shield himself from incoming strikes. When he spots an opening, he fires back with a volley of ice spikes, but the hawk easily evades them, surging forward with a sudden burst of speed, and that's not the only surprise it has in store. The hawk lets out a piercing screech at a frequency that disrupts Rio's magic, causing his ice shields to vanish and leaving him nearly unprotected. But the hawk isn't finished, yet it hovers menacingly in front of him, and Rio senses that a major attack is coming, though he can't predict when. Moments later, Rio can feel electricity in the air as a bolt of lightning is shot straight at him, and an attack like that would have been fatal. But luckily, he was able to use a stick as a lightning rod and jump away to save himself. As Rio struggles to shake off the lingering shock, the hawk swoops down, aiming to deliver a fatal strike with its sharp claws. At the last moment, Rio summons his ice blade and deflects the attack. They exchange several more blows, but Rio remembers his intense training with Dullahan, so he spots an opening in the hawk's guard and drives his sword straight through its neck. As the hawk crashes to the ground, Rio slowly walks toward it, feeling a sense of understanding. He knows what it's like. The hawk lost an eye because of him, and ever since, it's been driven by the need to prove it was stronger, pushing itself to evolve. But Rio has also been working hard to grow stronger, and in the end, despite everything, the hawk was still defeated. Afterward, Rio starts making his way home, but to his complete surprise, a dragon suddenly appears before him. Remembering what the book said about dragons being unbeatable, he's convinced this is the end for him, but to his surprise, the dragon speaks to him through telepathy. It doesn't seem aggressive at all. In fact, it explains that it's just passing through, searching for a black hawk that passed through the area. The dragon simply wants to know if Rio has seen it nearby. Relieved that the dragon isn't hostile, Rio quickly realizes it must be referring to the hawk he just defeated. Nervously, he apologizes and explains that the hawk attacked him first, leaving him no choice but to fight back and end its life. The dragon is in shock that a human like Rio was able to defeat a hawk, though he doesn't appear particularly bothered by it. What really catches his attention is the sword Rio carries. He immediately recognizes it as the Fairy King's blade. For the Fairy King to entrust such a weapon to a mere boy, Rio must have done something to earn his favor. The dragon has grown fond of Rio, and Rio, still lacking much knowledge about this world, was hoping to ask him some questions. The two end up chatting for several hours, well into the evening, but their conversation is eventually interrupted as the dragon says he must return home. Rio expresses his gratitude for the dragon's answers, and the dragon thanks him in return, saying it's been a long time since he's had such an engaging conversation. They part ways with a warm farewell, but meanwhile, up in heaven, Michael is going over the documents related to Rio's reincarnation when he suddenly spots something he had previously overlooked. It turns out Rio was granted a hidden trait, something Michael hasn't seen since he sent a girl to that world 10,000 years ago. In Rio's case, the trait is eternal youth, and Michael finds it rather unusual. Rio heads to the beach, craving salt grilled seafood, but he's shocked to see a giant shipwreck. He notices a man's dead body, which makes him feel sad, but then he suddenly hears another man's grunt, relieved and happy to realize someone is still alive. Abel remembers how the ship was destroyed by a giant sea monster, and when he wakes up, he's surprised to find himself alive. He looks around and sees his belongings placed next to the bed, so he grabs his sword and walks out of the house. Rio arrives and greets him. Abel is surprised that he couldn't sense him at all. Judging by the way Rio is dressed, he assumes Rio has nothing else to wear, but quickly realizes he shouldn't think poorly of the man who saved him. He introduces himself and thanks Rio for saving him, but Rio mentions that all he did was bring him home, so there's no need to thank him. He shares the sad news that, unfortunately, no one else survived. Abel realizes their bodies must have also washed ashore. He reveals that they were all smugglers, so Rio doesn't need to worry about them, but this shocks Rio. However, before Abel can say anything else, his stomach growls from hunger, so Rio invites him to lunch. While eating, Abel learns that Rio doesn't own any clothes, which surprises him, so he asks why he doesn't buy new clothes. But he soon realizes that since Rio has no money, he can't procure necessities. He thinks he might have offended Rio, but he mentions that there aren't any towns around here, so he can't just buy new clothes. Abel realizes he must have gotten the food by hunting, which impresses him, and he wonders if Rio used the knife to hunt. But Rio reveals that it's only for self-defense and cleaning whatever he catches, because he uses water magic for hunting. Abel is impressed because even in the central provinces, only about half of the population can use magic, and he is part of the ones who can't. Rio remembers Michael told him that the percentage of the magic users is 20%, but Abel is unable to understand his mumbling, so Rio says it's nothing. So, Abel asks Rio to take him to the coast since he wishes to confirm something. On the way, Abel asks Rio if he needs a staff since he is a magician, but Rio tells him that he doesn't have one, which shocks Abel, and he thinks Rio is too poor to afford it. He tells Rio that if they run into any trouble, he should let him take the front line, but Rio refuses. Abel insists that it's the least he can do, otherwise his reputation will get tarnished for always being the one getting saved, so Rio reluctantly allows him. As they reach the shore, they are shocked to see that the bodies are gone. Rio thinks either the monsters ate them or the water carried them back into the ocean. Abel reflects that if Rio hadn't saved him, he would have met the same fate, so he's grateful to be alive. Rio remarks that he must be very lucky, and Abel agrees. Abel then mentions that it feels odd for the man who saved his life to be calling him Mr. Although Rio believes Abel is older than him. Since he's requested it, he agrees to call him by his name. This makes Abel happy, as that's how all his friends address him. Rio is surprised that Abel considers him a friend, but as he's thinking about it, Abel informs him that he couldn't find what he was looking for. Rio then asks what he plans to do next. Abel says he needs to find his friends somehow, and the first step is to reach the town of Loon. Although Rio hasn't been there himself, he believes it lies to the north, and that they'll need to trek across that side of the island. Abel then gets an idea and decides to recruit Rio as his guide. Rio agrees, on the condition that he gets at least one day to make his preparations. Rio realizes he won't be able to continue his dream of living a slow life. At night, when he tells Abel that he needs to bid farewell to someone, he is surprised since it's very late, but Rio mentions that the person is only available at this time. As he leaves, Abel remembers how he earlier said that no one else lived around there, but he thinks perhaps he wants to pay his respect to someone, and maybe he wasn't always alone on the island. But nonetheless, it's not his job to intervene in Rio's personal matters. Sometime later, we see that Rio has actually gone to bid farewell to the Dullahan, saying he will be leaving the forest of Rondo for a while, but he feels grateful for the training he has received that has enabled him to survive. He knows he will be away for a while, so he decides to use all his power in their last sparring session. Rio charges forward with full force, but the Dullahan easily deflects all his attacks, leaving him exhausted. Before leaving, the Dullahan gives him new clothes, which makes Rio very happy and promise to wear with pride. The next day, they finally begin their journey, and Rio wears his new outfit, which fits him perfectly, but on their way, they soon run into a lesser boar, so Abel tells him to stand behind him and observe. He charges at the boar, and activates the combat skill called Total Impalement, which creates a hole in the boar's abdomen, and it dies on the spot, impressing Rio. He wonders what sort of skill it is, so Abel thinks a magician like him must have seen it for the first time, but it's very common for swordsmen and other people who use weapons to fight. The next morning, as they resume their journey, Abel hears a sound, and they notice two lizards in the marsh. Abel thinks they'll be difficult to deal with in the water, so they decide to take another route to avoid them. As they move along the alternate path, Rio senses that the lizard folk are following them. He informs Abel who realizes they have no other choice but to fight. Rio tells him that there are a lot of them, so he'll use his magic to take them out. Abel reminds him that he doesn't have his staff, but Rio simply chants a spell and kills them all with icicles, shocking Abel. Together, they take out all the lizard folk. After the fight, Abel asks Rio about the spell, noting that the wind magicians he knows can only cast a single spell per invocation. Rio suggests that maybe it's different for water magic before they resume their journey. Rio uses magic to summon water so they can stay hydrated. However, Abel notices that Rio used a different incantation than before, which makes Rio nervous, and he quickly changes the topic, saying Abel must be imagining things. After walking for a bit, Abel gives Rio a coin, and he's surprised to see it since it's his first time seeing this world's money. So Abel explains that it's a bronze florin used in the kingdom of Knightly, where Lune is located. He further explains that in the central provinces, each mints their own coins, but they all use the same denominations, and Knightly is one of the 3 major nations, with the other 2 being the Debuhi Empire and the Handelu Federation. Rio finds the name Debuhi a bit strange, so Abel wonders if he has a problem with the nation. Rio clarifies that he just finds the name a little unusual. He explains that a nation's name is very important to its people, since they have to introduce themselves everywhere as being from Debuhi, which does sound odd. Rio admits he wouldn't like to introduce himself like that, and Abel thinks he's overthinking it a bit. After some time, they finally get out of the forest, but as they are walking, Abel notices a rock moving, so he gets ready to attack. But Rio creates an ice wall, which blocks the rock. Abel notes that they have been surrounded as they have stumbled into a rock golem's nest, but Rio is surprised to see the rock golems, since he always thought they were humanoid with arms and legs. Abel tells Rio to stay there while he charges forward towards the golems, but his total impalement attack has no effect on it, as it quickly regenerates itself, which shocks him. Rio tells him that he has an attack he wants to try, so Abel tells him to go ahead. Rio creates 10 layers of ice walls joined together and drops them over the golem to immobilize it. Abel is shocked to see such powerful magic, but Rio casually mentions that he's only taken out 2 golems so far and plans to do the same with the rest. Soon they take out most of the golems and only one remains, but surprisingly it isn't moving. So Rio thinks perhaps they draw energy from the ground, and since it's flipped over it can't draw energy from Earth. Just then, Abel notices a big magic stone attached to its bottom, which makes him happy, but he wishes he could collect it from the rest as well. But unfortunately that won't be possible now. On their way, the duo notices a giant hippo sleeping, and Rio wonders if Abel wants to slay it, but Abel has no such ambitions. He reveals that he's never seen it in person, but it appears to be a behemoth. Suddenly, they notice several wyverns approaching, which excites Rio. They'll be able to witness a monster battle from the front row. Abel thinks the behemoth is at a disadvantage, but Rio believes it won't go down so easily. As the wyverns begin to attack, the behemoth gets up and lets out a loud screeching sound that knocks them out, making the wyverns fall to the ground. Rio explains that it used magic negation. At night, as they set up a fire to cook their meal, Rio jokes that he was hoping for a match between Abel and the behemoth, but Abel tells him that's not happening. He mentions that he's heard of traps in dungeons with similar effects, but he's never actually seen magic negation before. Hearing the word dungeon excites Rio, and Abel wonders if Rio wants to hear more about them. Rio says he would like to visit a dungeon himself, so Abel tells him that there's only one dungeon in the central provinces, and luckily, it happens to be in the town they're headed to. Rio jokingly asks why Abel has been hiding this information from him, prompting Abel to get defensive, saying he didn't know he was so interested in dungeons. Rio continues teasing him, asking if he's kept any more important information from him. So Abel asks if he knows about elves and dwarves. Rio tells him that he doesn't, so Abel informs him that dwarves are skilled smiths and they are good at fighting. Also, Lune has a few of them. He further explains that Lune only has one elf, while the rest are settled in the woods, which they never leave. So Rio thinks it's just the way he has pictured, but Abel doesn't believe him since he has never been outside that island. The next day, Rio continues to lead the way and reveals that across the mountain, they'll find a human settlement. Abel wonders how he got this information, so Rio recalls how the dragon told him everything. He tells Abel that it's better if he doesn't know, and he calls his source of knowledge beyond humankind. As they walk, they suddenly sense something approaching from behind. In that moment, a giant griffon appears, leaving Abel in shock, who is frozen in fear. But Rio quickly takes some meat from his sack and throws it into the air, and the griffon grabs it and flies away. They're both relieved to have survived. arrived. Abel notes that he was completely stunned, while Rio admits they might not have made it if they had tried to fight it. Abel thinks they aren't built to fight such monsters, and he notes there aren't many reports of anyone running into behemoths or griffons for centuries, so he thinks something is wrong with this place. Rio finds it a bit rude, and he thinks maybe humans aren't looking hard enough, so Abel thinks perhaps these frozen mountains have been keeping them out of human territory. As they're walking, Rio suddenly remembers that the wyverns that attacked the behemoth came from the direction they're now traveling. Soon, they spot some wyverns feeding on their prey, and Abel notes that they can't fight them. It usually takes around 20 experienced adventurers to take down just one, and even then, there are often casualties. Rio thinks that even if they try to avoid them, they'll likely encounter more along the way, and they won't be able to avoid fighting forever. Rio wonders if it would be easier to fight the wyverns while they're on the ground, and Abel agrees, thinking he can use his sword more effectively that way. So Rio steps forward to engage them. He summons several ice spikes to stab the wyverns, and Abel follows up with his total impalement technique. However, the wyvern's screams attract more of their kind. Rio uses an ice attack from above to bring them down, and Abel quickly finishes them off. After the battle, they collect the magic stones. Abel admits he can't believe how easy it was, while Rio wonders if Abel was hoping for a life and death battle just to get his heart racing. Just then, another flock of wyverns is on the way. They both prepare to fight, knowing they have no choice but to defeat them in order to keep moving. After successfully taking them all down, they reach the top of the mountain and are overjoyed to see a human settlement on the other side. After defeating so many wyverns, Rio feels confident, and he believes he wouldn't mind if they came across more of them. But Abel finds this ridiculous because he thinks it would be best if they never ran into those dangerous creatures again. Abel admits that it was surprising how they managed to collect so many magic stones from the wyverns, but he suddenly stops talking as he realizes that they have traveled quite far north. Though Abel is completely clueless about where exactly they've ended up, Rio nervously hopes that they haven't accidentally entered the Debuhi Empire, but Abel quickly reassures that this isn't the case, since the empire is farther north. Rio is relieved, which makes Abel curious about why he seems to hate that place so much. Rio tells him that he has nothing personal against the empire, but he simply dislikes the name, which Abel finds rather odd. Just then, Rio notices a road cutting through the landscape, and Abel observes that it's running east to west, so he looks around carefully and recognizes the area. Rio finds him lost in thought and asks if everything is alright, so Abel explains that if they follow the road west, they will soon reach the town of Kailati. This news excites Rio because he really looks forward to sleeping in a proper bed, but Abel thought Rio wanted to fight even more wyverns. Rio quickly explains that those are two completely different things. Abel mentions that the food in the town of Kailati is delicious and insists Rio should definitely try it. This makes Rio even more excited to visit this new town. A while later, they arrive in Kailati and head to a nearby tavern. While they're sitting there, Abel suggests that Rio should register with the Adventurers Guild, but Rio has no idea what that means. Abel explains that guild registration will serve as his identification, allowing him to enter different towns and countries without paying any entry fees. Abel says that when they arrived in the city, he acted as Rio's guarantor and paid a silver coin as the entry fee, but Rio jokingly asks if it was part of a sneaky plan to make him a servant. Abel keeps trying to convince Rio to join the guild, explaining that they can sell magic stones and monster materials there for a good price. Otherwise, Rio would have to become an alchemist to use those things, which would be a huge hassle. Rio is surprised that they have alchemy in this world, but he's shocked even further when the waiter brings his plate of curry rice to their table. He thinks to himself that, in most Isekai stories, the protagonist has to travel a lot in order to find curry, but somehow it already exists in this world. Abel asks Rio what he's mumbling about, so Rio says it's nothing and takes the first bite, but it's so tasty that he can't stop himself from devouring it in seconds. Rio orders another plate and asks Abel if they have curry like this in Lune. Abel confirms that they do. He is glad that Rio enjoyed it, and he admits that it was quite tasty. Even the next day, as they leave the town, Rio continues to praise the curry they had the last night, and he asks Abel to spill the beans about the best desserts in town. Abel is caught off guard and doesn't know how to answer, so he just says he'll think about it. They continue their journey, and after spending a few days walking, they finally see the town of Lune from a distance. As they reach the city gates, the guard recognizes Abel and says everyone was worried since he'd been missing for months. Abel explains that he managed to safely return thanks to Rio. The guard excitedly shakes Rio's hand, grateful that he saved his friend. Abel then pays the entry fee, once again acting as his guarantor. The guard then asks if they will be heading straight to the guild and mentions that Abel's friends are currently out of town, but once they return, they will be shocked to see him. Once inside the city, Abel suggests they head straight to the guild to register Rio as an adventurer. Since Abel can help him rank up, Rio is curious and asks what that means. Abel explains that new adventurers usually start at rank F, but with the endorsement of a B rank or higher, they can start at rank E or even D. Rio quickly realizes that this means Abel must be above B rank, which makes him feel proud. While Abel gets shy and quickly changes the subject, Abel goes on to explain that higher ranks allow access to better quests, which also means better rewards. He recommends ranking up, though he adds that Rio probably won't need to worry about money anyway, since they will earn a lot by selling the Wyvern magic stones. Rio wonders if the magic stones are really that valuable, and Abel explains that they're actually quite rare. Selling them all at once could even crash the market, but he trusts the guild will know how to handle it. They finally arrive at the guild, where the receptionist, Nina, is shocked to see Abel that is still alive. Soon, all the adventurers gather around him, and Rio realizes that Abel is actually pretty popular. Rio thinks he should give them some space and steps outside the guild to enjoy the fresh air. Just then, an elf girl walks past him and notices Rio wearing the Fairy King's outfit. She mentions he must have impressed the Fairy King quite a lot. Rio is unable to answer properly, so she says she's in a hurry and perhaps they will meet again sometime and walks off. A short while later, Abel takes Rio back inside the guild, where he tells everyone that he survived only because of Rio, who will soon be registering as an adventurer. Abel hopes they will all look after him. Rio is happy to be the center of attention as the others praise him for saving Abel. Moving on, we see Rio's registration process, and Abel says he wishes to recommend him for D rank, but Nina is shocked, since this is the first time anyone from his party is recommending an adventurer. Abel says Rio is very talented, but Nina tells him that she has no problem with it, though according to the rules, they must present some kind of physical proof of strength. Abel says that he was hoping to speak to the guild master about it, so Nina goes to inform the guild master about their request while they wait in the meeting room. When Nina shares the good news, the guild master rushes over, eager to see Abel with his own eyes. He had been very worried about him. He then notices Rio and introduces himself as Huma Glass, the guild master of Loon. He thanks Rio, making him feel a bit awkward, and Rio simply says he was just in the right place at the right time. Abel tells Hugh that he wants to endorse Rio for a rank up, so Hugh asks about the required proof. Abel confidently assures him that Rio is actually stronger than he is. Abel shows him the magic stones, and Hugh realizes that their green color means they belong to wind elementals. Based on their size and vivid glow, he suspects they might be from wyverns, which Abel confirms. Hugh is shocked, finding it hard to believe they managed to collect so many, since fighting that many wyverns would normally require an entire army. He worries that if such monsters were to attack the city, it could be completely destroyed, but Abel reassures him there's no need for concern, as they encountered the creatures far to the south of the Malefic Mountains. Rio is surprised to hear the name, so Abel tells him that earlier, after they found the road to Kailati, he realized where they were. Hugh reveals that it is said no one has made it through those mountains alive, and even experienced adventurers don't go there unless they have a very compelling reason. Hugh can't believe they defeated all those wyverns by themselves, but now that he has seen the physical proof of Rio's abilities, he has no objections to the rank up request. Suddenly, Abel's party, the Crimson Sword, arrives at the guild. Abel goes to catch up with his old friends, while Rio heads off to finish the rest of the registration process. As Rio enters the guild master's offices, he starts to wonder if he truly deserves the D rank. Hugh explains that while Abel is very gifted, even he can't take down a wyvern alone, so if Rio helped defeat several, he must be exceptionally talented. As Hugh pats Rio on the back to congratulate him, he's surprised by how strong Rio's body feels for a mage. Just then, Nina arrives with the paperwork and properly introduces herself before starting Rio's registration. She begins the short interview by asking his name and confirming that he's a mage. Then she asks about his magic element, and he tells her it's water. When she asks where he lives, Rio explains that he just arrived in the city. Nina lets him know that for the first 300 days after joining the guild, he's allowed to stay in the guild's lodgings. Nina asks if he's ever been in a dungeon before, and he admits he hasn't, so she tells him about a monthly introductory dungeoneering course, which offers a full guide for new adventurers and tips on what to watch out for. When Nina asks if he's interested, Rio excitedly says yes. She lets him know the next course starts in 2 2 days and says she'll sign him up. Nina tells him to be at the meeting room on the 3rd floor at 9 o'clock that day. When Rio looks surprised, Nina adds that there's a clock in town to help him keep track of the time. With that, Nina wraps up the paperwork. But Rio gets confused when she says it's time to start the actual registration. She asks Rio to place his hand on a crystal, and the device instantly creates his guild card, which she then hands to him. Nina congratulates him on officially becoming a registered adventurer. As they leave, Hugh feels relaxed because he was really worried about Abel, since things looked quite grim in his absence. He thinks he would never want to experience that again, which makes him thank Rio even more because he saved them all. He remembers he hasn't informed someone about Abel's return, so he immediately grabs his communication device to make a call. Meanwhile, Abel takes Rio on a walk, and when Rio asks where they're going, Abel tells him they're off to get his rewards for helping him get back to the town. Abel mentions he wants to buy Rio some new clothes and a staff. Rio thanks him, but admits he doesn't understand why Abel keeps mentioning a staff. Abel explains it's because he is a magician, but Rio tells him he can cast magic without one, and he can also use his sword in close combat. Abel is shocked to hear that and asks about the sword, so Rio shows it to him. However, Abel thinks it looks more like a knife than a proper sword. He worries that he might have hurt Rio's feelings, but Rio doesn't mind at all. Instead, he asks for Abel's help since there are still many things he doesn't know about this world. Rio soon learns that a day here is 24 hours, a week has 7 days, and a month has 30 days, basically the same as on Earth. He's surprised to learn that clothing is also measured in centimeters. It feels like too much of a coincidence, and Rio starts to wonder if there might be some kind of connection. Maybe someone else was teleported to this world before him. That would explain why so many things are the same as his home planet. Abel then invites him to his party where Rio is the guest of honor, and he introduces Rio to everyone as his savior. The next morning, Nina walks with him and asks if he had fun last night. Rio says he did, but admits he's just a little exhausted. They soon arrive at the guild dorms, and as they enter the room, they see a guy doing push-ups. When he notices Nina, he gets flustered. She tells them that Rio will be their new roommate, and the two introduce themselves as Nils and Ito. After reminding Rio about his class, Nina leaves. Nils comments on how beautiful she is, while Ito says they should stop being so formal with each other. Just then, Nina returns with another newcomer who will also be joining them as a roommate. Ito thinks the new guy looks pretty young, and Ammon confirms he's just 16. Sadly, after losing his parents, becoming an adventurer was his only option to make a living. Nina tells Rio that Ammon will also be taking the basic dungeon course with him, so they should go together, which they both agree to. Meanwhile, Abel's friend Lynn can't believe that a mage could create a thick ice shield. She thinks they're usually too thin and can be shattered by something as simple as an air slash. She also insists that using it midair to attack an enemy is completely impossible, but Abel tells her that Rio did exactly that. Lynn explains that magic can typically only be conjured close to the caster, so none of it makes sense to her. Still, the priestess says that if Abel is saying all this, then it must be true. However, Lynn fears that if Rio were to ever turn against them, it would be a big issue, or if he joins the kingdom as an enemy. Abel assures them that it won't ever happen. When they ask how he can be so sure, he explains it's because Rio hates the kingdom's name. The next day, Rio is taking dungeon class. The instructor announces that they've finished their introductory lessons on dungeon exploration. That afternoon, they will venture into the first floor of a real dungeon. Ammon appears quite nervous about this prospect, so Rio advises him not to put too much pressure on himself, otherwise he will exhaust his energy before they even begin their dungeon exploration. When the instructor asks if anyone has questions, Rio raises his hand and asks if there's a way to instantly travel to a dungeon layer you've already cleared. The question impresses the instructor, though he explains that only certain dungeons in the southern provinces have that feature. He adds that such dungeons don't exist in Lune, as far as he knows, since he's only heard about them through rumors. Ammon is impressed by Rio's knowledge and thinks it's no wonder he reached D rank, but Rio quickly changes the subject, saying he just heard it from someone else. In the afternoon, as the newbie adventurers prepare, they learn that the city is essentially built around the dungeon. They're told that every few years, the number of monsters inside increases drastically in an event known as the Great Tidal Bore. The instructor adds that during this time, some monsters can reach the surface, which is why they has double-layered walls for protection. Rio realizes realizes that the outer wall is meant to protect the city from outside threats, while the inner wall defends against monsters from the dungeon. Ammon, already feeling nervous, thinks it sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, but the instructor reassures them that it only happens once every few years and insists there's nothing to worry about for now. As they enter the dungeon, Rio notices that Ammon still looks tense, so he tries to reassure him by saying they're all in this together, so there's nothing to worry about. The instructor tells them that there are no dangerous monsters on the first floor, so they're free to explore the starting area. As they walk a bit further, they spot something and stop. Rio tells Ammon that he'll hold it in place with his ice magic, and Ammon should take the chance to attack. They soon come across a soldier ant, and Rio remembers from the beginner's guide that the easiest way to kill it is by striking the base of its neck. He then fires 8 ice lances to pin the ant down and urges Ammon to go and finish it. Ammon rushes forward and, standing near the ant's neck, delivers a powerful strike that cuts it off, which makes him feel very confident in his abilities. He thanks Rio. In response, Rio tells him to collect the magic stone as a trophy from their first expedition. Ammon asks if that's allowed, and Rio explains that as adventurers, it's only natural to collect magic stones. They earn their living from the dungeon. After all, when they finally dig out the stone, both of them feel proud and happy with their success. That night, they return to the guild to celebrate their first dungeon visit and their first kill. Nils says he wishes they could have some alcohol, but Ito explains that the guild doesn't serve it, and they're not allowed to bring any from outside either. He thinks it's probably meant to discourage adventurers from drinking. Nils argues that the rules are too strict since they're just celebrating their achievement. Ito changes the subject, saying he's impressed they managed to defeat a soldier ant on their very first dungeon excursion. Ammon thinks they only succeeded because Rio pinned the ant down, giving him the chance to strike. But Rio praises Ammon's skill with the sword and tells him not to downplay his abilities. Nils is happy they managed to get the magic stone, while Ito asks what their plans are for tomorrow. Ammon says he wants to visit the dungeon again, but doesn't feel confident going alone, so he's unsure about it. Rio offers to go with him and suggests they try reaching the 3rd floor, which Ammon eagerly agrees to. Rio finds it odd that an ant showed up on the 1st floor, and Nils mentions that normally only bats are found there. Ito tells them that there have been reports of ants appearing on the 1st and 2nd floors over the past few months, which makes Rio wonder why they were there. Suddenly, Abel approaches from behind and joins the conversation, explaining that the ants can dig tunnels all the way up to the 1st floor. Rio thinks veteran adventurers shouldn't sneak up on rookies, especially since his friends look clearly startled, but Abel says he was just sharing some expert knowledge to help them feel more relaxed. Abel tells Rio's roommates that while Rio is strong, he has some personality issues, so they should look after him. Rio feels he shouldn't be bothering them like this. When they realize Abel is from the Crimson Sword, Nils quickly jumps up, proudly saying he's an F-rank swordsman, and that Abel is his hero. He asks if they can shake hands, and Abel happily agrees, filling Nils with joy. Abel then advises them not to push themselves too hard, reminding them that survival is every adventurer's top priority. Nils promises to remember that, but Rio can't help but wonder why Abel showed up so late at the guild hall. Abel explains that their last quest was tougher than expected and took longer to complete. He says they just got back, but then his party members show up and are surprised to see him there since they were supposed to report to the guild master. Abel makes an excuse, saying he's just doing his duty by guiding the newbies, but his friend Warren picks him up and throws him over his shoulder. Abel calls out to Rio for help, but Rio says reporting the mission is important, and as the party leader, Abel should do his part. Abel doesn't like that response and jokingly calls Rio a traitor. Before leaving, Lynn walks up to Rio and silently stares at him for a few seconds without saying a word. A few minutes later, Rio's friends talk about how impressed they are by the Crimson Sword Party. As they praise Abel, Rio doesn't understand why they're so interested in him. Meanwhile, as Abel is being taken to the guild master, Rigia tells Lynn not to stare at people, thinking about how she was watching Rio, but Lynn replies that anyone would be curious after hearing Abel praise him. Abel then tells them not to worry, they'll soon see Rio's power for themselves. The others just think he's trying to act cool. The next morning, Ammon is excited to head back to the dungeon, but Rio reminds him to take it slow. There's no need to rush. Once inside, they quickly encounter monsters. Rio fires ice lances at them, while Ammon, feeling more confident, reacts quickly when a wolf lunges at him, slicing through its body with ease. Another wolf tries to sneak up on Ammon, but Rio hits it with more ice lances, giving Ammon the chance to finish it off. With each fight, Ammon grows more confident in his abilities. After they finish off all the the wolves. Rio tells Ammon that his swordsmanship reminds him of Abel. Then he recalls that Ammon once mentioned his teacher was a former adventurer from his village. Ammon explains that his teacher's name is Kiro, and he trained at a well-known school in the capital. Rio says he believes Ammon has the potential to become a great swordsman like Abel. Ammon, in turn, is impressed that Rio, despite being a mage, seems so knowledgeable about swordsmanship. Rio explains that he used to train with a mentor, but since his style is original, he doesn't know if he's skilled in it. Rio asks Ammon if he's ready to continue exploring. Ammon says yes, but Rio thinks he should rest a bit longer since his fighting style still seems quite exhausting. He suggests that Ammon start running regularly to build up his stamina, and recalls how Abel used to train first thing in the morning. Rio adds that even the most talented fighters have to practice hard, which motivates Ammon to push himself even more. The next day, Rio heads to the library, hoping to learn more about alchemy. The receptionist hands him a few introductory books. One is a beginner's guide, and the other is a recipe book filled with useful information. After finishing the reading, Rio thinks he'll need his own copies if he wants to take alchemy seriously, though he wonders how much they might cost. Suddenly, the entire town goes dark as an eclipse covers the sky. But something feels off, like the whole world has shifted. Rio senses someone behind him and quickly summons multiple layers of ice walls, just in time to block a fire attack from an unknown enemy. As the dust settles, Rio sees a demon girl. The demon seems surprised that a human got caught up in this, though she casually adds that it doesn't matter. She's going to kill him soon anyway. From the power behind her attack, Rio realizes she's an Akuma. He knows he should run, but he isn't sure if escaping is even possible in a situation like this. The Akuma girl forms a massive ball of fire, and Rio quickly summons multiple ice walls again. However, he notices they aren't holding up as well as before. She blasts a hole through the wall and fires a wind bullet at him, but Rio manages to dodge, avoiding a direct hit to the heart. She's surprised he was able to block her hellfire, and even more shocked when he dispels her wind lance. Then she notices the robe he's wearing and realizes it came from the Fairy King. Annoyed, she decides she'll have to get her hands dirty and fight him up close. The Akuma charges in to finish him off, but Rio isn't ready to give up. He draws his sword and begins blocking her strikes with determination. She mocks him for being too slow, so he follows up with ice attacks, but she dodges them with ease. Rio quickly realizes she's using wind magic to move at such high speed. She suddenly jumps into the air and launches a powerful attack, but Rio manages to block it just in time with his sword. Rio thinks that as long as he stays on the defensive, she won't be able to land a hit. He also feels that her strikes are nothing compared to the harsh training he endured with the Dullahan. The Akuma notices he's wielding the Fairy King's sword too, and starts to question what he really is. She begins forming a fire attack, but Rio dispels it with an ice lance before she can launch it. Shocked by his speed, she wonders how he's casting so quickly and calls him a monster with incredible abilities. She realizes how dangerous he is and charges at him with full force, but Rio dispels all her attacks and pushes her back before launching massive ice spikes in her direction. In response, she uses raw power to create two concrete walls from the ground, blocking all of his attacks effectively. Just as the Akuma girl thinks she's completely safe, Rio launches a surprise attack from above, injuring her shoulder and cheek. He rushes in to press the advantage, but quickly realizes she's already healed from the damage. While he's momentarily distracted, she sends him flying into a nearby building. The Akuma girl believes she's won the fight, but suddenly, water droplets begin to fall from the sky. As soon as they touch her, they start burning her skin, and she screams in pain. Enraged, she unleashes a massive wave of bloodlust. But fortunately for Rio, the eclipse ends just in time. She introduces herself as Leonor, but Rio already knows she's an Akuma. She's surprised he's aware of her kind's existence, which means she should have killed him, but she knows it's impossible to defeat him within the time limit. Leonor tells him she enjoyed the fight and looks forward to seeing him again, but Rio doesn't feel the same. Still, Leonor insists they'll meet again because of how strong he is. Even if she can't return, he might encounter others like her. This leaves Rio intrigued, realizing there are more Akumas in the world. Before Before leaving, she warns him not to get himself killed because now his life belongs to her. Leonore also hopes to be stronger the next time they meet, then suddenly vanishes from sight. Rio feels glad to be alive and believes it's all because of this robe. Otherwise, there would be a hole on his shoulder. He decides his next step is to buy those books. So he heads off to withdraw some money from his account. After withdrawing money from his account, Rio feels happy, realizing he's quite rich from selling those wyvern stones to the guild. He thinks he won't have to worry about making a living anymore. But when he returns to their room, he finds no one there waiting for him. He decides to head to the bookstore to buy the alchemy books. But on the way, he suddenly spots some adventurers bullying his friends in the street. Rio hears the leader telling Rio's group they should always be ready for an attack, since monsters don't give warnings. But before he can finish his point, Rio knocks the bullies out with precise ice magic. Their leader, Dan, gets angry and tries to punch Rio, but Rio easily dodges and hits him with the handle of his sword, hitting him so hard he ends up vomiting. Then Rio gives his friends magic potions to help them heal quickly. Still, he notes that they must be exhausted and suggests they all go to the hot springs to recover. Later at the hot spring, Ito heals his shoulder injury using healing magic. Ito is surprised that Rio was hurt despite being so strong in battle. Ammon asks what Rio was fighting earlier, but Rio avoids the question, saying he'll tell them another time when he's ready. The next day, Rio's friends head to the dungeon, and together they manage to defeat several monsters. But Ammon gets wounded fighting the goblins, so Ito uses lesser heal to cure his wounds. Ammon thanks him, and Nils thinks it was a close call because they narrowly survived. So Ito adds that goblin archers shouldn't be on the 5th floor. Nils suggests they should call it a day and head back to the surface while splitting their winnings 3-way as usual, which surprises Ammon that they are already leaving. Nils says they shouldn't push their luck any further. His motto is that survival is their top priority, which makes Ito wonder if he got that from Abel. Nils argues that it's only logical to prioritize their lives, and everyone agrees. Ammon then thinks that if Rio had come with them, things would have been much easier. But Ito points out that a party is usually made up of members with similar skill levels, and they're no match for him. Outside the dungeon, Rio thinks he needs to improve his skills and turn his weaknesses into strengths. He has no other choice. He also recalls Leonore's incredible speed during their fight and suspects she used wind magic to close the distance, which makes him a bit jealous. Still, he reminds himself there's no point chasing what he can't have. Instead, he should focus on what he can do. He wonders if there is a way to move quickly using water magic, and the first spell that comes to his mind is water jet. He remembers that he has used it underwater to surface before, but so far he hasn't used it on land, so he decides to test it. Rio creates a thick layer of ice on the ground and tries to imagine ice coming from all points in his back to propel him forward. He creates a total of 256 water jets behind him, but he isn't successful, leaving him disappointed. However, he reassures himself that it's a work in progress, and the next time he will try with over 1,000 water jets. He decides to visit the library to read more on akumas and alchemy. Meanwhile, Lynn reads through the forbidden spellbooks but can't find any information on the spells Abel said Rio could use. She thinks it's impossible to create a thick ice wall in mid-air or ice spears strong enough to pierce a wyvern's defenses. The only explanation she can think of is that they're original spells, but in her mind, only the Empire's Inferno magician is capable of creating something like that. Syrah arrives and is surprised to see Lynn there. Lynn says she was looking for something but unfortunately didn't find it. Curious, Lynn asks if she was away on a quest. Syrah replies that she went on a mission to the royal capital and tells Lynn she should go now. The envoy is waiting for her. Meanwhile, Nils struggles to talk to Nina. She comments that they came back rather quickly, so Ito explains about the archer goblins on the 5th floor. When Nina sees the magic stones, she realizes they're telling the truth and quickly rushes off to inform the guild master. She thanks them for sharing such important information. Nina informs Hugh about the recent discovery, and he notes that those monsters aren't supposed to appear until after the 10th floor, so it's a serious warning sign. He asks if there are any B-rank parties currently in town. Nina tells him that both the Crimson Sword and the White Brigade are around. Hugh asks if the brigade's main force, led by Phelps, is present. She confirms they returned from an excursion 2 days ago, so they should be in town. Hugh then tells her to summon both groups. He'll meet them in his office. A short while later, Abel hears that the White Brigade is coming too, and he's not happy about it since he doesn't know how to deal with them. But Rihia points out that he's known them for a while now, so he should understand them well enough. Lynn thinks Abel is always whining and tells him he should learn learn from Warren. When they arrive at Hugh's office, they see the White Brigade is already there, and Phelps greets Abel. Abel returns the greeting with his usual response. Hugh thanks everyone and assumes Nina has already filled them in, but he repeats the key point: goblin archers have been spotted on the dungeon's 5th floor. Abel asks how reliable the information is, and Hugh says it's 100% confirmed. The adventurers who saw it brought back the magic stones as proof. Phelps then asks what they're expected to do, and Hugh explains that he wants them to enter the dungeon and check for any signs of a dungeon stampede, which refers to the explosive growth in monster population. Hugh explains that it's been 10 years since the last one, so they're likely due for another soon. Rihia believes the appearance of goblin archers on the 5th floor could be an early warning sign. Hugh then adds that they'll be paid 100 gold coins up front and 200 more upon completion. Abel asks if their only job is to confirm whether it's really happening. Hugh explains that if it is, they must immediately return to the surface so the dungeon entrance can be abandoned and double walls set up in a joint effort between the guild and the regional knights. He adds that he's already informed the local lord about the quest and shared the defense plans. Abel thinks that's a lot of preparation. Abel figures that Hugh must truly believe the dungeon stampede has already begun if he's making such detailed plans. Hugh agrees, saying it's better to be over-prepared. If it's really happening, they'll need every available force. He tells them to be ready, as they'll head out tomorrow morning. He's already issued a notice closing the dungeon to other adventurers. Finally, Hugh asks if they're willing to accept the quest, and both parties eagerly accept the challenge. The next morning, at the guild dorms, Rio gets ready to head out, and the others wonder where he's going so early. Rio says he's heard the Northside Library is very advanced, so he plans to study alchemy and secretly hopes to find more information about Akumas. Ito mentions that only D-rank adventurers are allowed there, but Rio is already prepared for that. Ammon then wonders if the rumors are true about the library having forbidden texts. However, Ito points out that Rio needs to be B-rank to gain access, which leaves him a bit disappointed, but Nils encourages him, saying he'll qualify soon enough. The others also start getting ready to head to the dungeon and wish Rio luck before he leaves. A little while later, Rio arrives at the library. He thinks the southern one was bigger, but he likes the atmosphere here. Suddenly, he spots the elf girl he met in the city a few days ago. Meanwhile, both parties arrive at the dungeon entrance. Abel notices that the White Brigade has only half as many members, so Phelps explains they only brought C-rank adventurers or higher. When the guild master asks if they're ready to open the gate, Abel stops him. He has a bad feeling. He then tells Lynn to use her wind magic to scan the 1st floor. Lynn uses her magic to scan the area and sees over 100 monsters just on the 1st floor. They realize the dungeon stampede has already begun. Hugh immediately orders his men to alert the knights and close the city gates, as the monsters will be coming out any second now. At the guild, Nils, Ito, and Ammon notice that the dungeon is closed for the day and wonder if it's connected to yesterday's issue. Just then, a messenger arrives and announces that the dungeon stampede has begun. According to emergency protocol, all adventurers must head to the walls to help stop the monsters. Meanwhile, Rio meets the elf girl, who introduces herself as Syrah. She asks what brought him there, and Rio says he wants to study alchemy, which she finds fascinating. He explains that he hopes to create a golem, which impresses her even more since it's a very difficult task. Unfortunately, Syrah doesn't know of any books specifically about golemcraft, but she says there are some that could help him learn the basics. Syrah tells Rio to follow her and asks if he likes reading. He says he loves it but hasn't been around books in a long time. Syrah jokes that he makes it sound like it's been decades. Rio then asks if she's an elf, which she confirms, adding that she's also an adventurer in a B-rank party called Wind, though she's the only member. That reminds Rio of what Abel said about there being only one elf in town. Syrah mentions that it's unusual for an elf to live in a human settlement, but she's glad she did because it led her to meet him. She then takes Rio to the section where he might find books on golemcraft. Meanwhile, the city gates close as they try to seal off all access to the dungeon. Realizing the monsters are coming, everyone takes their positions. Suddenly, the dungeon door breaks as a horde goblins go outside. Hugh quickly orders everyone to launch long-range attacks to weaken them before they get too close. They manage to hold off the goblins just long enough for Margrave Loon's knights to arrive, which gives everyone some relief. Hugh is glad he met with Commander Neville yesterday, but even so, the number of goblins is far greater than during the last stampede 10 years ago. Hugh grows more worried as the goblins keep coming out of the dungeon, slowly wearing down the adventurers and knights. Phelps tells tells his team to brace for a long battle, especially since they're only facing goblins so far. Abel and his team are fully prepared. He tells Lynn to conserve her mana, but also says that if she has any powerful spell that could help turn the tide, she shouldn't hesitate to use it. They soon run out of arrows, but fortunately, other adventurers arrive with more from all the weapon stores in town. Nils tells Abel he has a message from the guild master. A bigger threat is likely on the way, and he wants the Crimson Sword to be ready to handle it. Ammon helps distribute the arrows, while Ito focuses on healing the injured adventurers. After they finally defeat most of the goblins, Hugh tells everyone it's time to descend from the wall, and they follow his order, ready to go on the offensive. Lynn uses her wind magic to help them land safely, while a girl named Shenna creates a clay wall to block off the goblins. Abel and Phelps leap over the wall and swiftly take down the goblins, showing off their superior skills. They soon come across a huge goblin and realize it's the goblin general. Phelps thinks the battle will be over once they defeat it, but Abel notices there are 3 generals, which means the Goblin King must be nearby. Abel quickly comes up with a strategy. He and Phelps will each take on 1 goblin, while Rihia and Shenna handle the 3rd. They need to be quick so they can finish before the Goblin King shows up. They bravely face the challenge, but just as they're fighting the generals, Abel suddenly senses something and shouts for everyone to duck. A powerful air slash strikes them, and Abel realizes the Goblin King was willing to sacrifice his own generals to kill them. Watching the battle, Hugh thinks that only Abel's magic sword and Phelps's spear can defeat the king, but even with those weapons, they seem to be struggling against such a formidable opponent with so much raw power. As Phelps gets pushed back, he thinks things don't look good for them, but Abel suddenly steps in front of him and charges at the Goblin King using his perfect shadow technique. He then activates his total impalement technique and stabs the king in the chest. However, even after being pierced by the sword, the Goblin King doesn't go down, shocking everyone. Abel remarks that he didn't expect it to be that easy. Abel calls out to Lynn, and she unleashes her magic spell, Bullet Rain, which finally takes down the Goblin King. Everyone is relieved they succeeded. Phelps realizes Lynn had been preparing her ultimate move the entire time, and Abel explains that it's a powerful spell, but it requires a long incantation. Meanwhile, deeper inside the dungeon, something even more terrifying is sealed behind a door. As Rio returns to the guild, he notices the hall filled with adventurers all celebrating something, so he wonders what that's about. Meanwhile, Hugh wishes he could also drink and relax because he still has lots of paperwork to handle. He notes that on top of everything, the researchers from the royal capital will be arriving soon to conduct research on the recent incident, and although the dungeon will be closed for a month, he believes the aftermath of the attack will be much worse. A while later, Rio meets his friends, who explain the situation to him. He finally understands why they're drinking alcohol, even though it's normally not allowed in the guild. Nils excitedly tells Rio about Abel's expert swordsmanship and how he defeated the Goblin King thrusting his sword while signaling Lynn to unleash her ultimate spell. Ito adds that it was actually Bullet Rain, and it's supposed to be one of the most powerful wind spells there are. So Ito also joins the discussion by saying that only Abel was able to dodge it, but he wonders how he did that. Just then, Abel arrives, and he tells them that he used the sword skill Perfect Shadow, which is a technique for dodging any kind of ranged attack, including magic. Nils praises Abel for his heroic performance earlier, but Abel insists Nils was also great in his supporting role. Rio finds the name Perfect Shadow rather strange, and Abel had already expected him to say something like that. Their conversation is cut short by the sudden arrival of Lynn and Rihia. The girls tease Abel, saying they already expected him to be with Rio since he seems to be his favorite person. Though Rio suspects they might be a bit jealous, Lynn asks Rio if he can really create ice walls in midair. He confirms he can, up to about 40 meters above the ground, which surprises her. Rio reassures her that it's not easy, it took a lot of practice. Lynn remarks that most people can't do it and asks if it's an original spell. Rio is unsure, so she rephrases, explaining that most magic is cast by reciting existing incantations. Rio explains that incantations are a matter of personal preference and vary from person to person, but Lynn still doesn't quite understand. Nils then reminds Rio the food will be gone if they keep talking, so Rio excuses himself. Abel explains that, according to Rio, incantations are used mainly for show, and he can cast spells without them. This leaves Lynn wondering how such a thing is even possible. The next day, Rio finds his friends gathered around the job board and wonders why they aren't working. They explain that the dungeon is closed, so they plan to take a collection quest on the surface, but there's a surplus in the market, so no one is offering extraction contracts. They ask if Rio is also looking for quests, but he says he's searching for a type of ore he needs for his alchemy practice. They guess he means magic copper ore, which is very expensive, but Rio says it's only 500,000 florins. Ammon points out that's roughly 50 gold coins, and Nils jokes that it must be nice to be that rich. Nils laments that they can't earn anything without jobs, so Rio gets an idea and decides to hire them all to collect magic copper ore. They prepare to head to the abandoned mine near the village of Ruse. About half a day's walk away, Rio offers each of them 4 gold coins, regardless of how much they collect, and an additional 25 gold coins for every piece of magic copper ore they find. His only condition is that they avoid unnecessary danger and return safely. Nils asks if Rio is really sure about this, but Rio points out that 37 gold coins is still less than what he'd pay for the ore in town. However, since it's not a guild job, they won't receive any credit for it. They all happily accept the mission, and Rio returns to his room only to hear some commotion outside. He looks outside and is surprised to see some soldiers bullying a girl, and even more surprised that the one trying to protect her is none other than Dan, the same person Rio had taught a lesson to not long ago. As the knights try to take the girl away, Dan pulls her back and pushes them away. One soldier prepares to strike him, but surprisingly loses his balance and falls. Dan himself seems unsure of what just happened. The knight tries to attack again, but the same thing happens. He ends up on the ground once more. They wonder what's happening. Just then, Phelps suddenly arrives and demands to know what the knights are doing. They tell him not to interfere since he's just an adventurer, but he replies that he's also a nobleman, introducing himself as the heir to House Heinlein, realizing he's the son of the former commander of the Royal Knights. The soldiers are frightened and quickly flee. Phelps praises Dan for his bravery and tells him to take the girl to her friends. He then turns to Rio and asks if he's the one Abel has been praising so highly, introducing himself as the captain of the White Brigade. Phelps says Abel had told him about Rio, but after seeing his magic firsthand, he's certain Rio is truly talented. Rio feels nervous, so Phelps remarks that the knight must have simply slipped, trying not to reveal Rio's powers since he likely wants to keep them hidden. Phelps adds that during their recent mission, Abel was certain it would have been much easier to handle the great tidal bore if Rio had been there. They are then interrupted by Phelps' companion, who reminds him they're running late. Before leaving, Phelps thanks Rio again for dealing with the knights. As they walk away, Rio notes how strong they are, but wonders why the son of a Marquess is working as an adventurer. Later that night, while Rio is enjoying his dinner, Abel interrupts him and asks why he's sitting alone. Rio jokes that he won't pay Abel's bill and that Abel should be treating him instead since he's the senior, but Abel knows how much money Rio has and refuses. When the chef asks what they'd like, Abel orders the daily special. Rio then asks why Abel is alone, teasing that he must be planning to visit the red light district later, catching Abel off guard. When Abel gets defensive, Rio asks if he has a special girl and if it's Lynn, but Abel says she likes Warren, then realizes he said more than he should. Rio remarks it's an unusual pair, but admits love comes in all shapes and sizes. He then asks if Abel is interested in Regia, but Abel quickly denies it. Rio teases him for reacting like a middle schooler, a term Abel doesn't understand. When Rio again asks why he's alone, Abel decides to take him along. They head to the market, where Abel tells Rio that one of the investigators sent to Lune is an old acquaintance of his. The investigator is guarded by Royal Knights, but a few of them are corrupt and have slipped away tonight. Abel's task is to track them down before they cause any trouble. Rio suddenly stops Abel, pointing out some hooded adventurers he doesn't recognize from Abel's welcome party. Abel assumes they're here for dungeon exploration, but Rio reminds him the dungeon is closed. They follow the men into an alley where a hooded man tries to launch a sneak attack on Rio. He blocks it easily and quickly takes them all down with a couple of ice blocks from above. Rio finds them disappointing, expecting more of a challenge. While Abel notices an alchemy box, Rio gets excited, but Abel tells him it's for investigation. Abel learns that the men are actually C-rank adventurers from Jaclair, the capital of Handaliu, and wonders what they were doing there. He decides to hand them over to the city guards. Rio jokes that this is a rare accomplishment for him, but Abel says it's nothing new. Rio then asks if bragging about his adventures to everyone at the party counts as one, prompting Abel to ask how he even knows about that. Meanwhile, as Phelps is walking, the knights from earlier try to attack him in revenge. However, they are intercepted by Shenna, who incinerates them with her fire magic, leaving no trace behind, leaving Phelps impressed. Later, a group of men arrives in town and meets with Hugh, who isn't pleased when they ask him to reopen the dungeon for their their investigation and to provide adventurers for their protection. One of the men, Clive Staples, explains that His Majesty has appointed Earl Harold Lawrence, the Minister of Domestic Affairs, as the new head of their research expedition, giving them full authority over the team while they're in the field. However, Hugh reminds them that some requests simply aren't realistic. Clive again emphasizes what it means to have complete authority, but Hugh thinks they've forgotten the meaning of unreasonable. Their leader apologizes for the food situation and says he'll arrange for supplies to be brought in from neighboring towns, but Clive insists the dungeon must be reopened. Hugh pauses for a moment, then agrees, on the condition that if anything happens to his town or its adventurers, the guild will not be held responsible. He firmly adds that if they can't accept that, the dungeon will remain closed. The man agrees. Earl remarks that they can hire adventurers at a good rate, but Hugh tells him it depends on the adventurers themselves. Before they begin the dungeon exploration, Hugh warns them that there are no records of the dungeon's condition after a great tidal bore, so they should proceed with caution. Meanwhile, Rio visits the place where Abel's party stays and thinks their cafeteria must be nice. Before he can go in, a girl approaches and asks about the guild, saying she needs to deliver an important letter there. Rio plans to eat first, but the girl insists. A little later, Rio takes her inside, and she hands the letter to Abel, saying it's from Professor Hilarion. Abel reads it and finds that the professor wants him to support the court magicians in their dungeon investigation. Rio asks if the dungeon isn't closed, so Abel explains about the investigation party, a worried look on his face. When Rio asks if something is bothering him, Abel tells him about an A-rank party that never returned, and it wasn't just any A-rank party. Their leader was said to be a superhuman on the verge of S-rank. This means they have no idea what happens inside the dungeon after a great tidal bore. Rio thinks the smart choice would be to stay safe, then excuses himself to have his meal. While the girl thanks him for guiding her, Rihia asks her name, and she introduces herself as Natalie Schwarzkopf. Lynn recognizes her family as the famous water magicians, but Natalie says she's not that impressive. Lynn then asks if Natalie has heard of a spell that can conjure an ice wall some distance from the caster, but Natalie hasn't heard of it either. Abel wonders why Lynn is so obsessed with Rio's abilities, but Lynn protests, saying any magician would be interested in learning a spell like that. Just then, Natalie interrupts to ask if magic like that actually exists, so they tell her that Rio is capable of doing it. On that note, Abel tells them that if they ever fought Rio, not even the four of them together could defeat him, so they might as well give up. Besides, Rio isn't the type to kill anyone. He also advises Natalie that if she ever needs help and they're not available, she can ask Rio, who can usually be found in the guild's room number 10 or in the library. The next morning, Abel meets the team of investigators, while Hilarion explains that this magic device is used to trace mana left in the environment. Anything it detects will be reported to the analysis team in the tent. Abel shows great interest. Hilarion asks if he's begun to like alchemy, but Abel says it's actually his friend who's interested in the subject. This surprises the old man, as he never imagined Abel to be the type who had friends. On the other hand, Rio's friends return with the ore he had requested, so he rewards them generously, making them really happy. Ito notes that the dungeon is surprisingly opened once again, but Rio adds that it's only for D-rank and above adventurers. Meanwhile, Abel's team keeps moving deeper. After 3 days, they reach the 7th floor without encountering any monsters. Hilarion explains that the analysis team on the surface is reviewing their readings, but they haven't found anything unusual yet. Abel thinks they'll need to go deeper. Just then, he notices the researchers from the Royal Central University are in some hurry, so Rihir remarks that they're assuming the monsters from the Great Tidal came from below the 38th level. The next day, Hugh explains that E and F rank parties can't enter the dungeon, but they can take on alternate work by transporting food from other towns, which will require security. He adds that the White Brigade is already involved, but they could use more volunteers. Rio then asks about the color of the stones collected during the Great Tidal Bore, and Hugh tells him they were pale, which surprises him. Meanwhile, the exploration team discovers a strange door in the dungeon. One of the investigators mentions that it might be connected to another place. Clive is thrilled that his team was the first to find this gate, so he orders everyone to set up the equipment and begin examining it immediately. They quickly get everything in place, but as soon as the magic tool touches the dark gate, everyone vanishes from there. That was episode 7. Subscribe to not miss the next part and watch the next video on screen.